12. Tiffany Henyard. After spending 8 years on the Village Board of Trustees in Dalton, Illinois, 37-year-old Tiffany Henyard became the village's youngest and first female mayor in 2021. In 2022, she took on the additional role of Thornton Township Supervisor. Henyard won a sweeping victory in her campaign for mayor, nabbing 82% of the popular vote. But she began to fall out of favor just months into her term when the Board of Trustees sued her for alleged conflicts of interest. The board also accused Henyard of lacking government transparency, ignoring their questions, and using the local police force as a 24/7 personal security team, with taxpayers footing the tab. In late 2021, the board voted to censure Henyard, who accused its members of making the move out of petty revenge. She also denied having 24/7 police protection, but conceded that an officer had been stationed at her house daily, supposedly due to threats on her life. Henyard wanted to keep the personal police detail for the entirety of her term, something she claimed as customary for the mayor to have. The protection came at the hefty price tag of $1,000 per day, and the Board of Trustees ruled that Henyard had to pay for it out of pocket. Throughout 2022, the allegations against Henyard for misusing and overspending municipal funds continued. By January 2024, the village had reportedly fallen so far into debt that it could go bankrupt. The following month, news outlets reported that 13 of the village's police vehicles were at risk of repossession. Numerous community members have accused the mayor of using her position to retaliate against perceived political opposition. Several former village employees claimed that they were fired for political reasons, while some business owners claimed that they were harassed and extorted for campaign contributions. Henyard faces a growing pile of lawsuits, including one which accuses her of wrongfully denying a business license to a barbershop owner. Henyard vetoed the village board's request for an FBI investigation, so the board hired former Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot to investigate allegations of theft and corruption. The investigation is ongoing, and it looks like the feds may be getting involved anyway. In April 2024, FBI agents were seen at Dalton City Hall. Sources told ABC7 that they seized business and personnel records, including police records. An FBI spokesperson would only say that agents were conducting court-authorized law enforcement activity in that area. While local officials are not always keen to have big government in their business, some members of the city council seem to welcome the FBI's presence. Speaking with ABC7, trustee Brittany Norwood said that there's been a lot of spending that the council's not privy to, stating in her own words, "We've been asking for someone to come out here and save us." Around the same time, one of Henyard's top aides, Keith Freeman, was federally indicted for bankruptcy fraud, leaving some locals feeling hopeful that more arrests will follow. Speaking with WGN9 amid the breaking news, Dalton trustee Kiana Belcher said that nobody is untouchable. If this is the first domino to fall, let it happen. 11. Marian Barry. Shortly after taking office as Nashville's first female mayor in late 2015, Marian Barry began cheating on her husband with married police sergeant Robert Forrest Jr., who was the head of her security detail. Over the next 2 years, the two went on extended business trips together and attended numerous events including concerts and yoga classes. During that time, Forrest allegedly accumulated hundreds of hours of overtime pay and was reimbursed for travel expenses accrued during his travels with Barry. Forrest filed for retirement in late 2017 after 31 years on the police force. 2 weeks later, Barry publicly admitted to the affair. Shortly after that, Forrest's wife filed for divorce, and in March 2018, Barry was charged with felony theft. Later that month, she took a plea deal and admitted to the charge. The agreement required her to resign, and she agreed to reimburse the city $11,000 for unlawful expenses that were charged to the public's tab. Forrest also pleaded guilty to felony theft and was ordered to pay back the $45,000 of work pay he received for time when he was not actually on duty. He and Barry were both sentenced to 3 years of probation, and the affair was over by the time their cases were resolved. 10. Dowan Jones. Shortly before 9 p.m. on Halloween in 2022, an Oregon family noticed an SUV driving erratically in front of them on Highway 281 near Parkdale. The vehicle abruptly pulled over, prompting the family to slow down so they could get a description of the SUV and report the unsafe driving to law enforcement. But as they drove past, a man exited the passenger side of the SUV and fired 4 gunshots at their vehicle. Their car was damaged, but thankfully nobody was injured. Police identified the suspect as Dowan Michael Jones, the 47-year-old mayor of the small town of Rufus, which is located roughly 100 miles outside Portland and is home to less than 300 people. Jones had won the election for mayor in 2018 with 76 votes. Following the road rage incident, he was charged with 1 count of attempted murder and 4 counts of first-degree attempted assault. Needless to say, Jones was no longer the mayor of Rufus after his arrest. The town went without a mayor for several months until early 2023, when Austin Evans was elected to take over the position. In September 2023, nearly a year after the hostile encounter, Jones pleaded guilty to all 4 attempted assault felonies. In exchange for his cooperation, the attempted murder charge was dropped. He was sentenced to 18 months in prison, fined $13,000, and was ordered to surrender his guns. 9. Dale Glenn Massad. In February 2019, a SWAT team stormed the home of Port Richey, Florida Mayor Dale Glenn Massad. The raid came following an investigation that was launched after someone tipped off law enforcement about Massad illegally practicing medicine inside his home. He'd given up his medical license decades earlier in 1992 after one of his patients died, and one of his patients had recently ended up in the hospital after receiving treatment at his home. Additionally, there are allegations that Massad engaged in drug use and operated an illicit distribution network for medications. After banging on the front door, loudly identifying themselves, and receiving no answer, the SWAT team went at it with a battering ram and shot a hole through it, only to realize that the door opened outward. Once the door was open, a member of the team threw a flashbang into the house. Just a moment later, 2 gunshots came from inside the home, prompting the team to back away from the residence. They could see Massad talking on a cell phone on the 2nd floor with a gun in his hand. The team re-entered the house and ordered Massad to drop the weapon. He allegedly hesitated, saying that he didn't want to go back to jail, but he ultimately decided to surrender peacefully and was arrested without further incident. Pasco County Sheriff Chris Nocco told reporters that Massad was lucky he wasn't dead, because when someone says they're not going back to jail, it usually ends in a shootout with police or the suspect tries to flee. According to court documents, Massad told police interrogators that he was woken up by the team's entry into the house. He allegedly admitted to firing 2 gunshots and was charged with 5 counts of attempted murder, 4 counts of practicing medicine without a license, and 2 counts of illegal use of a 2-way communication device. Following his arrest, Massad was still Port Richey's mayor. He didn't resign, and normally it would be up to the city council to remove him. In this case, though, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis issued an executive order immediately suspending Massad from office. If convicted as charged, the disgraced former mayor could have faced life in prison. But in early 2021, he took a generous plea deal which allowed him to plead guilty to 1 felony count of aggravated assault on a law enforcement officer, and in exchange, all the attempted murder charges were dropped. The agreement came with a 3-year prison sentence, including time served for the 2 years he spent in pre-trial detention, followed by 10 years of probation. Most people would likely say that Massad got a very good deal, considering the fact that he could have spent the rest of his life behind bars if prosecutors had pursued the attempted murder charges. During the plea hearing, Sheriff Sergeant Billy Lindsay expressed his anger and disgust at the outcome of the case. He reminded the court that Massad had originally been accused of intentionally, willfully, and knowingly shooting a firearm at law enforcement. Massad was also disappointed by the outcome, according to his lawyer Denny Devlaming, who said his client maintained that he thought he was acting in self-defense against a home intruder. 8. Marian Barry. Marian Barry Jr. served 3 consecutive terms as Washington, D.C.'s mayor, starting in 1979, making him one of the most powerful and successful local politicians of his generation. During the late 80s, however, the FBI began investigating Barry and his associates for suspected illegal drug use. In January of 1990, the FBI and the DC police carried out a joint sting operation on Barry at a hotel, where a hidden camera captured images of the mayor smoking crack cocaine. Barry was nabbed with the help of his former girlfriend, Hazel Diane Rashida Moore, who acted as an informant and invited Barry to the hotel room where he was recorded using drugs. During his arrest, Barry could be heard commenting on how he knew Rashida had set him up and that he shouldn't have taken her up on the offer to join her at the hotel room. Prosecutors charged Barry with 10 counts of drug possession, 3 counts of felony perjury, and 1 misdemeanor count of conspiracy to possess cocaine, even though the drugs that he was seen smoking were provided by Rashida. He continued to serve as mayor after his arrest and even during his trial. Roughly half the jurors believed Barry was guilty as charged and that he acted arrogant during his trial. The rest of the jurors felt that the prosecution had failed to prove their case and that the authorities had possibly even falsified evidence in an attempt to set Barry up. The jury found Barry guilty on 1 possession count. They acquitted another and were deadlocked on the remaining charges. The judge declared a mistrial and sentenced Barry to 6 months in federal prison. Barry immediately began working on his political comeback following his release from prison in April 1992. He easily won a seat on the city council, defeating the 4-term incumbent with 70% of the vote. At the time, he said he wasn't interested in running for mayor, but apparently he had a change of heart and announced his candidacy in 1994. There was plenty of opposition to Barry's continued participation in politics, but efforts to stop him failed. Following his victory in the 3-way Democratic primary with 48% of the vote, Barry addressed the critics who kept bringing up the video of him smoking crack, stating in his own words, "Get over it." He won the election with 56% of the vote, reflecting decreased support for the Democratic candidate compared to past elections. Barry's 4th term revolved mainly around the financial crisis that DC was experiencing at the time, as well as mismanagement of the city's services. His proposals for getting things back on track were rejected by Congress, which ordered the creation of the District of Columbia Financial Control Board to oversee the district's day-to-day spending and finances. The board also had the power to overrule Barry's financial decisions. In 1997, the Clinton administration agreed to a plan that would save DC from financial ruin. As part of the new legislation, the Control Board was given authority over 9 government agencies, stripping Barry almost entirely of his power. He was only left in charge of the Parks and Recreation Department, the Tourism Department, and public libraries. Convinced that Congress would not give power back to DC's leadership as long as he remained in office, Barry chose not to run for a 5th term. He went on to serve as a member of the DC Council from 2004 until his death in 2014 at the age of 78. 7. Charlie Robertson. As the civil rights movement took hold across the US during the early 1960s, Black Americans living in York, Pennsylvania began to protest police brutality and demanded an integrated police force. At the same time, various all-white gangs sprang up in and around the city, deepening the racial divide among York citizens. By 1969, the unrest had given way to violence, which began the previous year at the hands of white gangs. The escalating tensions reached a boiling point on the afternoon of July 17th, when multiple fights broke out between black and white gangs. The street brawls continued through the night and into the next morning, leaving more than 80 people injured and resulting in 2 deaths. Buildings were set ablaze and entire city blocks burned to the ground. 4 days after the rioting began, a 27-year-old black seamstress from South Carolina named Lily Bell Allen visited the city with her family. She was riding as a passenger in a car being driven by her sister Hattie Dixon, and their parents were in the back seat. As they drove around in search of a grocery store, they unknowingly turned onto a street filled with armed members of the White Newberry Street Boys and the Gerardas gangs. Realizing the danger the family was in, Hattie Dixon made a hurried effort to turn the car around. But it stalled in the street, and the gang members swarmed the vehicle. Hattie panicked, and Lily Bell Allen exited the passenger side of the car in an attempt to get behind the wheel. Lily threw her hands in the air and pleaded with the encroaching gang members not to shoot, but they opened fire on her and killed her at the scene. More than 100 shots were fired at the family's car, which meant that there were multiple gunmen and plenty of witnesses. but nobody was willing to speak with investigators, and Lily's murder went unsolved for 30 years. By the time the case was reopened in 1999, 3 of the suspects were dead, but a 4th suspect, who was suffering from terminal cancer, admitted to what he knew about the crime in a deathbed confession. Detectives also visited former gang member Donald Oldland, who refused to talk to them but confessed to his role in the crime to his wife later that evening. The next day, he left behind a tape-recorded confession for the police. Oldland was found dead later that day. As the pieces of the decades-old puzzle continued to fall into place, investigators discovered that York's mayor, Charlie Robertson, had been working as a police officer during the riots. He was the first officer to arrive at the scene of Lily's murder, and he was accused, along with 3 other cops, of failing to disarm the white gang members who killed Lily. The officers also failed to file a report on the incident or take any eyewitness statements. Another suspect in the case, Rick Naus, claimed that Robinson had given him ammunition. Naus said that Robinson told him to kill as many black people as possible as retribution for the killing of a police officer, Henry Shard, a few days earlier. During the fall of 2000, prosecutors informed Robertson of their plans to prosecute him on a murder charge for his alleged role in Lily's death. He tearfully announced the news to the public and put his political career on hold to focus on his legal case. He admitted to yelling "white power" at a gang riot the day before Lily's murder, but denied all other allegations. Robertson was one of 10 suspects who was arrested in the decades-old case. 7 defendants took plea deals in exchange for lighter sentences, but Robertson and 2 others took their cases to trial. The 2 other defendants were found guilty of second-degree murder and went to prison, while Robertson was acquitted by an all-white jury and walked free. He never went back to politics and maintained a low profile until his death in 2017 at the age of 83. 6. Brandon Holt. Located in central Georgia, the small city of Pineview is home to just 500 residents. Until recently, it was under the leadership of 34-year-old Brandon Holt, who was arrested in January 2024 following a 3-month investigation by state authorities. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation began looking into Holt's financial activities in October 2023 at the request of Wilcox County Sheriff Steve Malden. According to the agency, Holt transferred money from the city's coffers into his personal bank account via Cash App at least 75 times between June of 2023 and shortly before the investigation began. He's accused of stealing nearly $65,000 in municipal funds and was charged with 75 counts of theft by taking, 1 for each Cash App transaction. Holt refused to resign from his appointed position amid the ongoing case, stating at a public meeting in February that the charges are allegations. During the meeting, a local resident asked the city attorney what the process for removing Holt from office entailed, indicating that it was at least on some people's minds. Even after a grand jury indicted Holt on the charges in March, he refused to resign. In April, a specially formed review commission determined that the allegations in the indictment adversely affect the administration of his role as mayor. Following the commission's determination, Georgia Governor Brian Kemp issued an executive order suspending Holt without pay, pending the outcome of his criminal charges. Holt's arrest in January came on the heels of other controversies stemming from an investigation by local news station WGXA. The outlet began looking into Holt's activities after receiving calls from local residents about law enforcement being spotted at Pineview City Hall. At least one person told reporters that they were concerned about negative stories about Holt that were circulating in the area, and they wanted to know the truth. The station was able to verify that Holt is facing at least 10 felony charges relating to identity theft and fraud by deception in a case unrelated to his alleged theft as mayor. In 2022, he was arrested for allegedly stealing more than $22,000 from an asphalt company in Bibb County by using the business's bank account and routing numbers to make payments to his accounts. Holt pleaded not guilty to the charges, which alleged that the transactions occurred over a 4-month period in 2018. Then, in yet another strange incident that piqued the curiosities of local residents, Holt was shot during a trip to La Grange, Georgia in August 2023. According to Atlanta-based station WSB-TV, he'd traveled to the city from Alabama and was driving to his hotel after dinner when a car pulled up next to him at an intersection. Holt later told police that he thought the driver wanted to race, but instead they pulled a gun and fired several shots. He only realized he'd been shot after he rushed to pull over and noticed blood. Investigators ruled out the likelihood that the shooting was gang-related and believe it may have been a case of mistaken identity. And while Holt's not accused of any wrongdoing in this case, it didn't exactly do anything to help his ailing reputation. 5. Michael Cherco. When McKees-born Pennsylvania Mayor Michael Cherco went on vacation to Nashville with his wife in late 2023, he likely didn't expect to land at the center of news headlines in and around both cities. The 46-year-old was accused of acting drunk and belligerent at Dierks Bentley's Whiskey Row bar, where he returned after an earlier visit in search of his credit card. Security told Cherco that he'd gotten his credit card back when he paid his tab, but he was allegedly convinced that someone at the bar had kept it and was trying to steal it. A security guard flagged down a police officer at 2 a.m., and Cherco was cited for public intoxication and criminal trespassing. According to court documents, officers observed an odor of alcohol on Cherco, which isn't surprising since he'd been out drinking that night, and they noticed that his speech was slurred. Cherco admitted to being messed up, but the cops were able to convince him to leave and return the next day if he still hadn't found his credit card. He was warned not to return to the bar for the rest of the night, but police were called back to the scene just 20 minutes later. They arrived to find Cherco handcuffed by a security guard. The guard told police that he'd returned in search of his credit card and that he was too intoxicated to deal with. Due to his behavior, Cherco was taken into custody for his own safety. He was released the next day on a $250 bond with instructions to return to court at a later date. Following his arrest and all the unwanted publicity that followed, Cherco apologized to his family and constituents. He described the incident as an embarrassing situation and a misunderstanding, which admittedly could have been handled the next day. Cherco took responsibility for his actions, or as he put it, allowing himself to be in that situation, and he said he looked forward to hopefully getting the charges dropped. And he got his wish in early 2024, when prosecutors announced their plans to withdraw the citations at his upcoming court date, which he was not required to attend. In a statement, Cherco said that he knew it was a misunderstanding and that everything would work out. He also expressed his gratitude toward the system for dropping the case and to his supporters for standing by him after his arrest. 4. CARiD Kamu. At around 7 a.m. one morning in July of 2023, police in South Fulton, Georgia responded to a trespassing complaint at a local residence. At the scene were the homeowner and the local mayor CARiD Kamu, who was accused of entering the house without permission. The homeowner had received a notification on his phone notifying him of Kamu's presence. He didn't recognize the man in his house, so he got dressed and drove over there to confront the unwelcome visitor. Both parties told different stories about what happened when the homeowner confronted Kamu. The homeowner accused Kamu of aggressively shouting, "Do you know who I am?" while Kamu claimed that the homeowner had cocked a gun and threatened to shoot him when he tried to politely introduce himself. In a recording of the homeowner's 911 call, he could be heard telling Kamu to stay put twice, but not all the details of the exchange were captured in the call. According to a police report, Kamu admitted that he knew he was trespassing, but claimed that he thought the house was abandoned. He allegedly described the house as his dream home and said that he was interested in buying it. He then decided to go in and check it out on his way to a local dog park. Kamu was charged with criminal trespass and first-degree burglary. He was released on an $11,000 bond and was ordered to undergo a mental evaluation. This was not the first time Kamu made news headlines for shocking reasons. His political career had been mired in controversy dating at least as far back as 2022, when the city council asked the district attorney to investigate Kamu's use of a city-issued credit card. During an audit, it was discovered that Kamu had used the card to pay for a TikTok dance video in celebration of the city's 5th anniversary. Kamu defended the charge, saying that he consulted with his team beforehand, and they agreed that it constituted an appropriate use of the credit card. He agreed to reimburse the city for the sake of putting the matter to rest, but he refused to admit that he was at fault. This appears to be the first in an ongoing tit-for-tat between Kamu and the city council. A month after the council asked the DA to investigate Kamu's credit card use, the mayor asked the Georgia Bureau of Investigation to investigate the council for facilitating a culture of corruption. He accused local leaders of going too easy on a South Fulton police officer who allegedly had a relationship with a subordinate and misused seized funds. In early 2023, 5 of the council's 7 members sued to remove Kamu from office, claiming that he recorded closed council meetings and shared the recordings with the public for his own benefit. The lawsuit accuses Kamu of holding the city hostage by issuing vetoes, demanding the resignation of 3 city employees, and accusing the police of corruption. Kamu argued that he had a right to record the meetings and that he did it for the sake of holding council members accountable. But by sharing the information, the council says he ruined a pending real estate deal and is stopping the city from conducting its business. Opinions among local residents are divided, with many calling for Kamu's resignation while others have thrown their full support behind him. In October 2023, the mayor announced his plan to hold a special meeting with the public as part of his efforts to increase his transparency with his constituents. As of April 2024, he remains in office, with his most recent controversy stemming from pro-Palestine comments at a public event, which he later apologized for. 3. Michael Morano. Michael Morano was just 30 years old when he became Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania's first Latino manager and its first openly gay mayor in early 2023. He was appointed to the position in a 6-0 vote by the borough council after the previous mayor, Tara Probst, was elected to the state house. Morano's leadership began shortly before the extradition of local resident Brian Kohberger, who stands accused of killing 4 university students in the infamous Idaho murders. It was a chaotic time, with media clamoring in the downtown area during Kohberger's hearings. But the young mayor rose to meet the challenges of his new role. He also made it a priority to engage with the community he serves, which is a popular tourist destination due to its location in the heart of the Pocono Mountains. But nobody's perfect, and Morano is no exception. His good standing within the community was challenged in November 2023, when he admitted in a Facebook post that he had been charged with his second drunk driving offense 2 months earlier. In the post, Morano wrote that he had something very personal and humiliating to share. He went on to reveal that the arrest occurred in the Slate Belt region in September. He wrote, "It was not my first offense, which only makes my lack of judgment that much worse." According to the Slate Belt Regional Police Department's website, an officer found Morano stranded on a roadside at 3 a.m. His car had run out of gas and he asked for help, but the officer noticed possible signs of intoxication. Morano allegedly performed poorly on a field sobriety test and had a blood alcohol content of 0.2, which is 2.5 times the legal limit for driving. He was charged with general impairment and DUI highest rate of alcohol, BAC .16+, which are both second offense misdemeanors. In his Facebook post, Morano apologized profusely to the public. He said that he was thankful he didn't hurt anyone and vowed to earn back the community's trust. A lot of people expressed their support for Morano in the comments. Some commended him for taking accountability for his actions, while others acknowledged that everyone's human and makes mistakes. But he also received criticism, including from at least one social media user who questioned why he waited 2 months to come clean about the arrest. Another person wrote that people make mistakes, but that people in positions of public service are held to higher standards than average civilians. Some even called on Morano to resign. The Slate Belt Police website's listing about the arrest was published a few weeks before Morano made the Facebook post, suggesting that he may have realized the information was out there and perhaps wanted to get in front of it. But the general consensus seems to be that he deserves a chance to make good on his promise to get back into the good graces of the people he serves, and only time will tell if he keeps his word. 2. Chaudhry Moka. In April 2021, Chaudhry Moka won a slim victory in running for village president of Glendale Heights, Illinois, defeating his opponent by just 2 votes. During a village board meeting 2 years later in April 2023, Glendale trustee Mohammed Siddiqui spoke up about his dissatisfaction with Moka's leadership. Siddiqui offered some blunt honesty to the mayor, stating, "You're ruining this city. It's unbearable for me to stay quiet." During that same meeting, Moka accused trustee Chester Pojak of being an angry person. Bojack responded sarcastically, saying, "I'm not angry, I love you to death," only to follow it up with, "I'm lying," when Kokar thanked him. Civilians have also clashed with the 66-year-old village leader, who called one meeting attendee a loser for questioning whether he was paid to attend a local resident's wake. The resident, Michael Ontiveros, had lost against Kokar in the election. When Ontiveros asked Kokar if that's how he treats residents by calling them losers, Kokar called him a loser again. 4 days after the tense meeting, Kokar filed a police report accusing trustee Siddiqui of threatening to bite him. Kokar then filed a second report against the trustee several weeks later, in May of 2023. The exact reasons behind the ongoing feud between Kokar and Siddiqui are unclear. When asked about the situation by local station WGN, Siddiqui declined to comment on the specifics due to a $50,000 defamation lawsuit Kokar had filed against him in the past. He told the news outlet that Kokar filed the lawsuit against him and several members of his family as part of a harassment campaign against them. To better understand the dynamics of the ongoing feud between the mayor and Siddiqui, WGN reporters reviewed footage of village board meetings, which they say have been overtaken by a raucous tone. In August 2023, Kokar was charged with 2 felony counts of disorderly conduct for allegedly lying in the 2 police reports he filed against village trustees in April and May. He pleaded not guilty to the charges and is now also facing a battery charge for allegedly pushing Glendale Heights Police Chief George Pappas during a village board meeting in January 2024. According to prosecutors, Kokar shoved Pappas with both hands when Pappas intervened in a heated argument between him and a trustee. Under state law, Kokar is allowed to continue serving as the village president amid his ongoing cases, but he stands to lose his position if he's convicted of the charges. And now for number 1. But if you want to hear more bizarre and crazy stories, stay tuned after the video for some more content. 1. David McLean. 92-year-old Margaret McLean was severely ill and on her deathbed in October 2022 when her 70-year-old son, former Winchester, England Mayor David McLean, decided that he could no longer stand to watch her suffer. David had looked on helplessly over the years as his mother became bedbound and suffered one ailment after another. Towards the end of her life, she suffered from COVID-19 and pneumonia, and her condition began to worsen rapidly. It had been a year and a half since Margaret was even able to have a coherent conversation when one of her caretakers summoned David to her home in Waltham Chase, Hampshire. Her death was imminent and she could pass away at any time. But it still wasn't fast enough for David, who took a pillow and smothered Margaret. Almost immediately afterward, David called emergency services and admitted to pressing a pillow down on his dying mother's face. He was riddled with guilt and even called himself a murderer. During police questioning, David explained that Margaret was gurgling and screaming in agony when he made the desperate decision to hasten her demise. Because Margaret was in such poor condition, prosecutors were uncomfortable with assuming that her health didn't cause her death. Instead, they charged David with attempted murder. During his trial in April 2024, the court heard his police interview, which contained a recording of David confessing that he said, "I love you, Mum," as he pressed the pillow down into Margaret's face. He denies the attempted murder charge, and a ruling could come any day. It's been an emotional case for the entire community, where McLean's a well-liked citizen with an upstanding reputation. And his reason for committing the crime has gained a sympathetic response from some people, who understand how hard it is to watch a family member suffer. The trial came just as British lawmakers are debating a proposed Death with Dignity bill, which would give terminally ill patients more control over their end-of-life decisions. Whether the law will pass and the outcome of David's trial remains to be seen.
13. David Carrick. For 2 decades, an elite London Metropolitan Police officer named David Carrick terrorized an unknown number of women, using his job position to intimidate his victims into silence. Carrick allegedly threatened to plant drugs in one woman's car if she reported him, and saying that nobody would ever believe her over a high-ranking member of law enforcement. As an added warning, Carrick reminded the woman that he knew how to make evidence disappear. Victims accused Carrick of degrading them for hours on end. humiliating them in social settings, tracking their locations, and alienating them from their friends and family. One woman said that if she didn't fulfill Carrick's requests in the bedroom, he became physically abusive. On at least one occasion, he used his police-issued handcuffs to secure her wrist and ankle together, then left her home alone for hours. She finally left when he handcuffed her and threw her outside naked in the middle of the night. If Carrick got the sense that a woman might try to leave him, he allegedly intimidated his victims into staying by reminding her that he was a member of an elite police force that protects Britain's Prime Minister. When a woman mustered up the courage to leave, Carrick resorted to blackmail. An investigation found at least 9 complaints that women filed against Carrick between 2000 and 2021, including reports of alleged assaults. But no action was taken, and the paper trail ended there when the women either dropped the complaints or declined to formally pursue action. In one case, Carrick was put on administrative duties, but kept his job despite the seriousness of the allegations he faced. The case finally broke wide open in 2021, when a woman who met Carrick on a Tinder date gone horribly wrong reported his behavior. In footage of the arrest, the crooked cop seems annoyed to the point of acting arrogant, as if he couldn't believe some lower-ranking officers were daring to take a 20-year veteran of the force into custody. Carrick's fall off his high horse only continued from there, as more victims came forward and the investigation played out. He was ultimately convicted of 85 crimes against 12 women, and was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 30 years. Authorities believe there are more victims and are encouraging them to come forward. 12. Charlene OBrien. While working as a deputy at the Conroe Montgomery County Jail in Texas in 2021, Charlene Diane OBrien had inappropriate relations with a 28-year-old inmate named Jacob Parker. According to court documents, a drug issue at the jail had left one of its housing units without any floor workers. To make up for the shortage, the unit's cleaning duties were carried out by inmate volunteers from other housing blocks, including Parker. During one of his shifts, he and OBrien allegedly snuck off into an area that was out of the sight of both cameras and staff members, where they kissed and did other things. It supposedly only happened once, but one time is too many when it comes to this type of misconduct. OBrien was let go from her job and criminally charged for her actions. She pleaded guilty to 1 count of improper activity with a person in custody and was sentenced to 100 days in jail. 11. Brian Philipak. During the early afternoon one day in November 2016, a sheriff's deputy in northern Michigan pulled a vehicle over in response to multiple 911 calls about an erratic driver. Behind the wheel was 47-year-old Brian Philipak, an off-duty sheriff's lieutenant from Washtenaw County in southern Michigan. In a report, Montmorency County Deputy Zachary Morrison noted seeing an open bottle of vodka in Philipak's vehicle and observing obvious signs of drunkenness. He also described the suspect as uncooperative. Body cam footage showed Philipak begging Morrison to let him go so he could sleep it off. Morrison later wrote in the report that the seemingly sloshed lawman repeatedly tried using his status as a member of law enforcement in an attempt to get out of being arrested. With a blood alcohol content of 0.27, more than 3 times the legal limit, Philipak was arrested on suspicion of violating Michigan's super drunk DWI law, which applies to suspected drunk drivers with a BAC of 0.17 or higher. He was stripped of his gun and badge, but continued working for the Washtenaw County Sheriff's Office in a non-law enforcement role. Philipak pleaded guilty to a reduced drunk driving charge and was sentenced to a year of probation. But this wasn't his first run-in with the police over suspected drunkenness. In a July 2013 incident that was described in records obtained by MLive.com, a crying and visibly shaken girl hid inside an office at the Detroit airport and refused to come out, saying that she didn't want to ride home with her father because he was acting strangely. According to an incident report, an officer approached the girl's father, B. Philipak, and immediately noticed the smell of alcohol. Philipak allegedly said to the officer, "You won't arrest me," and "You don't know who I am, do you?" He admitted to having a few beers and driving to the airport, and was let go without charges, but warned that he would be arrested if he tried to drive. In a domestic incident that occurred several months later, Philipak's wife told police that her husband was getting treatment for alcohol abuse, but that he had come home obviously drunk. She wanted Philipak to leave for the night, but he apparently had nowhere to go and seemed too drunk to drive. In response to Philipak's history and the fact that he was reassigned to a non-police position rather than fired, Washtenaw County Sheriff Jerry Clayton told MLive.com that he was aware of past incidents and that appropriate corrective action was taken. He also said that past incidents were considered in deciding how to handle Philipak's employment following the DWI charge, stating, "We don't ignore behavior that doesn't meet our expectations. None of us gets a free pass." 10. Seth Guar. An elderly woman's loved ones encountered a heartbreaking and infuriating scene in early 2023 when the 77-year-old was found emaciated and suffering from hypothermia, and with no heat or running water at her Rochester, Minnesota home. Her only companion, a Yorkshire Terrier, had starved to death after going weeks without being fed. The woman's family had entrusted the disabled senior citizen's care to a nearby resident, 51-year-old Seth Guar, but he allegedly failed to perform even the most basic of tasks, including filling her prescriptions, and was accused of making more than $12,000 in personal purchases with the victim's debit card. According to authorities, Guar spent the woman's money on car repairs, sneakers, clothing, and fast food. The victim's family further claimed that the purchases continued while the woman spent 2 weeks in the hospital after being found in a highly neglected state. Guar was charged 4 months later with elder abuse, stealing from an elderly person, misuse of a credit card, use of a motor vehicle without authority, operating a motor vehicle while unlicensed, animal cruelty, and 2 counts of forgery. He pleaded not guilty and was released on an ankle bracelet after forking over $11,000 bail. The case appears to be ongoing. During an interview with local station WCVB, a neighbor described the victim as lovely and warm and caring, and Guar as anything but, stating, "If you think of humans as being somebody who would help out somebody in need, he's exactly the opposite." 9. Daniel Holtzclaw. In 2014 and 2015, 13 women accused Oklahoma City police officer Daniel Holtzclaw of using his position as a cop to assault them and intimidate them into silence. One of his victims, a 57-year-old grandmother named Janny Liggins, said that she was convinced Holtzclaw was going to kill her during a late-night traffic stop. She didn't think a police officer would do the things he had done to her and let the person live to tell the story, and was shocked when he let her go. Another woman, Shandegrion Sade Hill, reported being assaulted by Holtzclaw while handcuffed to a hospital bed. She later told CNN that the predatory officer continued stalking her afterward by following her to her home and following her on social media. Authorities accused Holtzclaw of specifically targeting black women in poor neighborhoods, including victims with drug and prostitution records, under the assumption that nobody would believe them if they complained. He was also charged with 36 counts in connection with 13 accusers. Holtzclaw's DNA was only connected to one of the assault cases in court. Prosecutors based their arguments mostly on other evidence, including GPS data corroborating the locations and routes victims provided in their complaints. The defense called the accusers' credibility into question based on their lifestyles and fought for Holtzclaw's complete and total innocence. In late 2015, the jury found him guilty of 18 counts relating to 8 victims and acquitted him of 18 other charges related to 5 accusers. He was sentenced to 263 years in prison. Holtzclaw's family has vowed to never stop fighting for his innocence, and he has attracted a considerable following of supporters who agree that he was wrongly convicted. Just as many people believe that he is wholly guilty of the crimes he's convicted of, and that he's exactly where he belongs. In 2019, the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals rejected Holtzclaw's appeal and upheld his conviction and sentence. The U.S. Supreme Court denied his request for a judicial review of the case the following year. 8. Christopher Hammond and Heather Hammond. Over a 3.5-year period beginning in December 2018, a husband and wife team allegedly abused their positions as U.S. Army officers to steal and sell expensive equipment while stationed at Fort Bragg in North Carolina. According to federal prosecutors, 38-year-old Christopher Hammond used the privileges associated with his rank as a Chief Warrant Officer 3 to order guns and accessories, welding and metalworking equipment, guitars, ATVs, tools, and other items of resale value. The goods were never logged as inventory, nor were they used by Hammond's unit. Investigators counted at least 200 items that were issued to the unit, but went straight into the crooked officer's hands for personal gain. In an email dated April 2021, Hammond confirmed an order of 50 rifle scopes and asked the shipper to make sure the parts weren't broken. He claimed that the scopes were requested for use during an upcoming deployment, but it was a lie. In another email exchange, a civilian sent some ill-gotten parts from Hammond to the manufacturer for repairs under warranty. A company representative sent the person an email instructing them to use their government email address and refusing to service the parts until authenticity was verified. In response, Hammond sent an email to the company stating that he was overseas with little internet access and complaining that an employee was holding the parts up for service. He claimed he needed the parts for training with his unit, but that was never the case. Authorities counted nearly $1.9 million in wire transfers that were deposited into bank accounts controlled by Hammond and his wife, Major Heather Hammond, over a 2-year period. While Christopher was accused of masterminding the scheme, prosecutors said that Heather knowingly allowed her husband to launder money through her bank accounts. In 2023, Christopher pleaded guilty to federal counts of theft, possession of government property, and money laundering. He faces up to 30 years in prison for his crimes. Heather took her case to trial and was convicted of spending money laundering proceeds and aiding and abetting. She faces up to 10 years behind bars. The pilfering pair can also expect to be fined when they're sentenced in late 2023. According to court documents, the Army wants their stuff back and plans to go after the couple's bank accounts to recoup the cost of items that can't be recovered. 7. Jill Curry. During her time as a civilian worker at the Washington County Jail in Oregon, Jill Curry began a torrid affair with 25-year-old gang member Jang Lee Delgado Galban. On at least 13 occasions throughout 2014, she snuck the maximum security inmate out of his cell and into a nearby supply closet for a clandestine quickie. Before each encounter, Curry waited until the sheriff's deputy, who worked in the control room, went to lunch. She then unlocked Delgado Galban's cell and 2 other doors so he could get to their meeting place. Curry was busted after an anonymous tipster reported the illicit relationship to law enforcement. Investigators soon discovered that in addition to the steamy closet sessions, she had been putting money on Delgado Galban's books and writing him letters under an alias. Curry was charged with 12 felony counts of misconduct and over a dozen misdemeanors. Shortly after her arrest, her husband, a sheriff's deputy, filed for divorce. After turning down a plea offer that would have sentenced her to 36 months in prison, she pleaded guilty to all counts. She tearfully apologized for her behavior and for putting her colleagues in danger. But the judge doubted her sincerity and sentenced her to 50 months, more than double the time recommended by prosecutors. During the investigation into Curry's misconduct, police discovered that another civilian employee, 32-year-old Brett Robinson, also had inappropriate relations with Delgado Galban. According to authorities, Robinson was also a control room employee. She let Delgado Galban out of his cell at least 6 times. But instead of hooking up in the supply closet, they met on the control room stairs. The two women were unaware that they were both sleeping with the same prisoner. After being caught and charged with 12 counts of misconduct, Robinson tried to argue in court that she was not guilty due to mental health issues. Her lawyer claimed that she was delusional during the encounters with Delgado Galban, and that her actions were therefore involuntary. But the judge denied the defense's request to present this argument at trial, and Robinson ultimately pleaded guilty as charged. She was sentenced to 3 years in prison. 6. Judge Jack Robinson. In early 2018, a Texas jury in Comal County reached a guilty verdict in the case of an accused human trafficker named Gloria Romero Perez. After learning that the jury had voted to convict Perez, Judge Jack Robinson entered the deliberation room and said that he believed the defendant was not guilty. He told the jurors that God had told him Perez was innocent and that a conviction would be a miscarriage of justice. Robinson urged the group to deliberate for a little while longer and see if they come to a different conclusion. They stood by their guilty verdict and reported that the judge had tried to influence their ruling. While apologizing to the jury a short while later, Robinson reportedly said, "When God tells me I gotta do something, I gotta do it." He came clean about his actions to the defense and prosecution and recused himself from the sentencing phase of the trial at the prosecution's request. In a self-report to the State Commission on Judicial Conduct, Robinson explained that he became increasingly convinced throughout the trial that anything other than a not guilty ruling would be inappropriate. He admitted in the report that he still believed the prosecution failed to present sufficient evidence to prove its case, but acknowledged that he had committed misconduct. Numerous other people involved in the case filed complaints with the commission, including the prosecutor, who accused Robinson of exhibiting bias in favor of the defendant throughout the trial. 2 jurors claimed that the judge entered the deliberation room, but twice with his requests for them to reconsider their decision. In October 2018, a different judge who had taken over the case declared a mistrial. He ruled that Robinson made multiple rulings that were not in accordance with the law, and that he failed to remain impartial in his comments about witnesses and evidence. The commission ruled that Robinson was likely suffering from a temporary episode of delirium when he inserted himself into the jury's conversation. He was let off with a warning after providing letters from doctors attesting to his sanity and reassuring the panel that he had not experienced any more episodes since that day in court. The decision to allow Robinson to remain on the bench infuriated some people, including the jury's foreman, Mark House, who told Routers that he believed the judge should have been fined and removed from the bench. Many agree, and it's cases like these and their light-handed outcomes that wear away at the public's trust in the system and cause people to question its integrity. 5. Lisa Talton Wells Doherty. While working as a care technician at an assisted living facility in Etowah County, Alabama, 57-year-old Lisa Talton Wells Doherty became the power of attorney for an elderly resident. She immediately began siphoning the woman's accounts and buying expensive gifts for herself, including $2 million homes, multiple cars, and dental implants costing $86,000. Doherty drained the victim of her entire life savings of more than $8.5 million, and also took control of the woman's $1.5 million property. But it's almost impossible to steal that much money without someone noticing. And state authorities launched an investigation into Doherty's crimes after receiving a tip from federal law enforcement. Doherty was arrested in 2021 and has remained behind bars ever since while sorting out the world of legal problems on her plate. In 2023, she pleaded guilty to 4 counts of felony financial exploitation of an elderly person. She was sentenced to 20 years with the requirement to serve at least 5 years in prison before becoming eligible for parole. Even in the best-case scenario, however, it's unlikely that Doherty will see freedom anytime soon. In addition to her state case, she faces pending federal charges of wire fraud, money laundering, filing a false tax return, and theft of government property. If convicted on the wire fraud charge alone, she could spend up to 20 years in prison. Needless to say, her days of swindling senior citizens are over for now. 4. Richard Bomgardner. Tennessee Judge Richard Bomgardner was highly regarded for the majority of his nearly 20 years on the bench. Known for being fair and ethical, he oversaw several high-profile cases, pushed for cameras to be allowed in courtrooms, and founded a drug court program in Knox County that served as the model of similar programs throughout the state. His downfall began in 2006, when he became addicted to painkillers that he received for a broken toe. Starting in late 2007, Bomgardner began receiving prescriptions for pain pills from at least 12 doctors, including a veterinarian, amounting to more than 2,200 pills over a 2-year period. He was also an alcoholic. When doctors became less willing to write prescriptions, Bomgardner began regularly buying pills from probationers and drug court participants whose cases he oversaw. In 2009, a drug court participant named Dina Castleman asked Bomgardner for help getting a job. Instead, he paid her to find pills for him and pressured her to become his mistress. He also bought her a cell phone for arranging the drug transactions. Bomgardner's substance abuse became noticeable to others. He began showing signs of impairment on the bench and frequently smelled of booze. His need for pills became so out of control that he sometimes made drug deals during court breaks. The judge's colleagues also started catching on to his affair with Castleman, who had criminal cases that were being overseen by other judges. In addition to urging at least one judge to drop charges against the young woman, Bomgardner convinced another judge to vacate an arrest warrant by lying and saying that he was working with Castleman to sort out her court matters. In 2010, he pressured a prosecutor for leniency in one of Castleman's cases. When Castleman failed a drug test for a sober housing program, Bomgardner called the director and said that she had actually tested clean. State authorities eventually launched an investigation into the rumors and allegations surrounding Bomgardner's drug use and arrested him for his alleged crimes. In March 2011, he resigned from the bench and pleaded guilty to official misconduct. Bomgardner was spared from prison time in the state's case, but was sentenced to 6 months behind bars after being convicted in federal court of lying to investigators. He was also disbarred, and many of the high-profile defendants who were convicted in his court were granted new trials due to the possibility of the judge making decisions while impaired. Bomgardner died from natural causes at the age of 70 in 2018, following years of declining health. 3. Ronald Davis. When her 4-month affair with a married Pennsylvania state trooper soured in September 2023, 37-year-old Michelle Perfinoff was violently tackled and hauled off to a psych ward under bogus claims. According to a criminal complaint, Perfinoff and 37-year-old Ronald Davis became entangled in a bitter feud after Davis locked Perfinoff out of his trailer, where she was living at the time, and refused to let her collect her belongings from a storage unit. Several days later, Davis obtained an order to place Perfinoff in a psychiatric emergency room on an involuntary hold. To demonstrate probable cause, he cited text message conversations in which Perfinoff appeared to make threats to self-harm. The off-duty cop then summoned help from his fellow troopers in tracking Perfinoff down so they could serve the order. When none of Davis's colleagues could find his mistress, he took matters into his own hands. With help from an unnamed civilian, he found Perfinoff in a picnic area at a state park and tackled her to the ground while she acted genuinely confused about what was going on and why she was being physically subdued. Disturbing footage showed Davis sitting on the much smaller woman's legs as she repeatedly expressed her desire to be left alone and said there was no valid reason for her to be taken into custody. Perfinoff repeatedly told Davis to get off of her, but he refused, and he also failed to explain why she was being detained, even though she asked him multiple times. And when Perfinoff tried to break free, Davis became even more forceful and overpowering. State troopers came to the scene and took Perfinoff to a mental hospital, where she stayed for a few days before doctors concluded that she was mentally sound and didn't pose any threats to herself or others. She gave law enforcement her side of the story and explained how her text messages were blown out of context by Davis, who most likely knew that Pervanov wasn't making any real threats, since the messages were meant as an obvious mockery of his alleged controlling and cruel behavior. Pervanov told police that Davis had previously threatened to paint her as crazy and warned that he knew how to use the law to his advantage. After reviewing the evidence and circumstances, prosecutors agreed that Pervanov was wrongfully detained and have accused Davis of misrepresenting the text message conversation in order to obtain the psychiatric hold order. In an affidavit, the state further accused the trooper of failing to get his supervisor's permission to physically restrain Pervanov. Davis faces charges of felony strangulation, unlawful restraint, false imprisonment, simple assault, recklessly endangering another person, and official oppression. As of September 2023, he was being held without bail while maintaining his innocence from behind bars. 2. Ana Betty Molina and Javier Molina. After his wife of 70 years passed away in 2012, Gustav Shapiro hired Ana Betty Molina as his housekeeper. The 95-year-old from Montgomery County, Maryland, began to show signs of delusional thinking, which played a role in his decision to cut ties with his adult son. Shapiro was lonely and depressed, making him a prime target for an opportunist looking to swindle big bucks out of a vulnerable and unsuspecting senior citizen. With Shapiro's last remaining family connection severed, Molina and her husband Javier began helping themselves to the elderly man's money in 2013. The couple withdrew thousands of dollars at a time from the victim's accounts and deposited it into their personal accounts. On one occasion, the Molinas got their hands on $300,000 of Gustav's money in one fell swoop via a cashier's check. Much of this activity was carried out with the victim's blessing, but his ability to understand and consent to the transactions was highly questionable. Records would later show that the Molinas gambled away a large portion of the money, squandering an estimated $60,000 to $70,000 per month when their habit was at its worst. The couple also bought a car and a house, which they moved Shapiro into and paid their daughter's college tuition with the stolen funds. Meanwhile, Shapiro granted Ana power of attorney over his assets, including a home he had owned since 1957, and listed her as the sole beneficiary of his will. Concerned bank employees called Adult Protective Services for the first time in 2013 after noticing the dramatic increase in Shapiro's banking activity. He was uncooperative with investigators, who eventually convinced him to allow a home visit and ruled that he was capable of making his own decisions and not in any danger. The case was closed, and the theft continued as Shapiro became increasingly confused from dementia and old age. He also became more agitated, and while his aggression was blamed on his medical conditions, at least one person would later testify that Gustav knew that Ana had taken all his money and that there was almost none left. People also noticed that Ana had stopped keeping up with Gustav's care, and she began making comments about waiting for him to die. He passed away in 2016, 3 months into the third Adult Protective Services investigation into his well-being and Ana's questionable control over his finances. The full scope of Molina's crimes was finally discovered after Shapiro's death, and justice came calling shortly thereafter. Ana and Javier were convicted of 5 felonies, including theft, conspiracy to commit theft, financial exploitation of an adult over 68 in an amount over $100,000, and conspiracy to commit financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. The judge sentenced Ana to 10 years in prison, followed by 5 years of probation, while Javier received a 6-year sentence followed by 5 years of post-release supervision.
Thanks for watching. Would you rather elect a mayor with a checkered past who's learned from his mistakes and vows to do better, or a mayor with a squeaky clean criminal record who seems to be too involved in politics? Let me know in the comments below. And while you're at it, subscribe to the channel. I'll see you next time. Bye.